workshop, number 3. Thanks for joining us here, especially despite the fact that it's not in the printed brochure. So we ended up having a very private privacy workshop. Today we have a distinguished lineup of speakers, and we're going to discuss the current challenges that we are facing when it comes to online privacy and the way forward. So the good old definition of privacy as the right to be let alone is suddenly not making that much sense, and it's constantly being challenged by new technologies like IoT and AI. And we live in the era of pick or it didn't happen. We have GDPR now. We thought the day never would come, but as of 25th of May, we have this game-changing regulation. And of course, this would definitely come up. My name is Ceren Ünal. I'm working at the European Regional Bureau of Internet Society, and I'll be moderating this session. And today we have a surprise speaker, Mr. Price O'Donoghue from the European Commission. He's the director of the Future Networks at DG Connect. And at first we thought he wouldn't be able to join us, so that's why his name is not on the list of speakers. But since he has limited time, I would like to start with you, Mr. O'Donoghue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm sorry for gate crashing the party and for making that horrible noise. But it's because the theme is very important. I was misled by the old version of the program, so even though a colleague was making arrangements for me to be here, I was making arrangements to be somewhere else. So it's great that you could squeeze me in, because of course this is an issue which is central to the work that I do with my team. We work on 5G, on Internet of Things, on the next generation Internet, on cloud, on software, and obviously we have a lot of involvement in virtual networks, on artificial intelligence, etc. And so privacy is everywhere. Could you pick a more obvious title? So it allows me to play around with that, in the sense that in everything that we do, the protection of personal data or privacy is actually a central issue. And therefore we need to not only do what we do with the tech community. We spend quite a bit of European taxpayers' money funding research on privacy technologies, on ensuring that, for example, Internet of Things technologies and the standards going with IoT are privacy enabled and take that into account. But we actually have to go further, and this is why talking with the multi-stakeholder community in EuroDiG and the IGF is so important. There are a few points I wanted to make. First of all, the GDPR. It was talked about in a session this morning. It will keep being talked about. It is something that we are actually quite proud of. I know that it's something we're still criticized a lot about, but it is not the high water mark, but it is what we feel should become the benchmark for protection across the whole ICT space. Now, it does impose a cost on companies, particularly small companies, and that's something which we are still looking at in terms of the compliance cost, and something that we do have to take account of when the national DPAs are looking at just how things are done. But of course it makes it all the more important that regulators, governments and the European Commission, as well as very large companies and platforms that control or have a bottleneck control on certain elements of the internet, we need to take even greater responsibility to ensure that others can understand and be put in a place where they can comply with privacy requirements, with personal data security requirements as well. So when you think of it in those terms, and we have done quite a lot of work, for example, when we looked at the economic data supporting our free flow of data proposal that's currently being discussed in Council and Parliament, we have clear data, not just sentiment, that shows that a lack of trust and security is one of the biggest inhibitors to the development of the internet in wide terms, the development of and take-up of digital technologies. The digital technologies which will help business to advance and drive the economy but even more importantly, the digital technologies that will actually facilitate individuals, create better living conditions, allow access to government, health and other public services in a low-cost but highly secure and efficient manner. The lack of security and trust, therefore, is our enemy in achieving our goal of rolling out those technologies to all parts of society. And therefore, that's why privacy is everywhere. That's why privacy has to be in everything that we do. It's also a situation which the more mature businesses, of which there are many, realize that it is also in their interest to ensure that they are themselves secure, seen to be secure, that they are part of a secure ecosystem. And therefore, we should be able to exploit even more the incentive for business to actually provide that privacy to their customers, whether it's because they're selling equipment to intermediaries or they're actually selling equipment or services to an end user. And so in the work that we are doing, whether it is on the design of cloud platforms, particularly as computing power moves out to the edge of the network to take account of artificial intelligence, to take account of the low latency required for many of the real-time services that we are pushing, for example in 5G, with online e-health services or even telemedicine with connected cars, etc. The security there, again, has to be a central part of what is put in place, and hence we come to security by design, but on the same path, increasingly we are now coming to privacy by design. And in fact, whereas the Commission is often criticised for regulating first, not thinking of how else do we do things, we have tended to move away from that model in many areas in recent years. But in this situation, there is a place for a floor. There is a place for a minimum set of rules. Why? Because those who are playing fair, those who are actually designing secure technologies and designing secure applications and services should not be undermined or undercut by somebody who's going for the lowest common denominator, i.e. I drive down my cost, I can offer my service or product more cheaply, and therefore I will corner the market. That's something where we, as regulators, we actually have an obligation to ensure that that does not happen. It's a market structuring measure which is often criticized in other parts of the world, but it's something which we have resigned ourselves to having to do while we create what we hope is a virtuous circle. So that's not perhaps what you expected me to say, but that is actually why, for so much of what we do, we need to listen to you as to how can we actually do that. There are experts in the room here on safety technologies, on privacy-enhancing technologies, but also experts on governance. How do we actually set rules? How do we actually set guidance for those who are actually supposed to implement this privacy by design? And I'd love to hear the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pirsia. This was great for setting the scene. Is it my mic? And speaking of GDPR, we have Ani Nozadze, who is the head of International Relations Department at the Office of Personal Data Protection Inspector of Georgia. Oh, that's a long title. And she will bring us the DPA perspective, and perhaps you might want to talk about the Georgian experience too, because you're harmonized with the EU. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, Joren. I think as we are now talking about the emerging problems and their solutions, what GDPR is trying to do is to attempting to do is to provide solutions from a legal perspective. And these legal regulations, these regulations have become necessary because we see that organizations are collecting more and more data. They are using this data. However, they are not proactively self-regulating and ensuring transparency and accountability. So I think in this case there is a need for legal regulations to offer new obligations. However, it also needs to be noted when we were discussing this that GDPR really stands on the same core principles that were there long before GDPR was was adopted, and even further beyond the EU, including Georgia. And I think what the data protection authorities will still be looking at would be the same principles, the same core principles of data processing that were there and that are still there, such as do not collect and use more data than is necessary, and do not do it longer than it is necessary. So these principles are still there. I think, well, yeah, as GDPR applies to some Georgian companies as well, what the Georgian DPA has been doing is offering guidance and advice in the form of free consultations to the companies and organizations in general. We have elaborated a couple of thematic and sectoral guidelines, and we recently published short informational guide on GDPR as well in Georgian language. And most importantly, we are also working on a new draft law on personal data protection that will try to advance data protection standards in the country, of course taking into consideration all the developments, the recent challenges that we are facing in Georgia as well as across the globe, and also the developments on the legislative level, including the EU GDPR and other regulations, as well as the modernization of the Council of Europe 108 Convention, the text of which has finally been agreed on recently. And additionally, what we also do with and how we work with the data controllers is to raise awareness and make them kind of realize that personal data protection of privacy is not only a legal obligation, but it is also a way to gain trust of your consumers. So a recent survey in Georgia, for example, that was carried out last year with the by the EU and the UNDP joint project showed that 81% of Georgian citizens think that personal data protection is a very important issue. So this once again highlights that people are more concerned about privacy, and it is them who also want to have their personal data protected more in the face of and in light of all the developments that are taking place. So I think if the organizations understand that protecting privacy well would be a competitive advantage for them, that could also play a role for them to do more themselves and to protect privacy better. So due to time constraints, I will stop here and hopefully we can discuss further.
Yes, there will be plenty of room for discussion. And now we have Jean Guioni from Veon. They are global telecoms operators, so we look forward to hearing your perspective, the private sector's perspective on the GDPR and privacy online.
Thanks. Yes, so I'm very happy to be there. Thanks to all of you. And yes, indeed, Veon is a telecom operator. This is also an OTT, so Veon has also developed a platform, an app, so which is kind of a schizophrenic attitude between a telecom and an OTT, so we are on both fronts. Telecom was previously known as Wimpelcom, and the name has changed more than a year ago. And Veon has a footprint here in Georgia, so this is Beeline, Georgia. And so we operate in 11 countries. One of them is in Italy, where we have a joint venture with Hutchinson. The rest of countries are not in Europe. So you can ask yourself, why does this guy wants to speak about GDPR where his footprint is not in Europe? So in fact, our HQ is in Amsterdam. So we are a European company with a HQ in Amsterdam, offices in London, a presence in Italy, and more activities in Europe. So this is why GDPR is key for us. This is key for us because, of course, our telecom and also an app. So this is, of course, key for us to comply, but we also want and try to do more. I have the chance of now working for almost 20 years, and in 2001, so quite a long time ago, I don't know if you remember where you were in 2001, I was like you, I was member of the French Data Protection Authority, I was member of the CNIL, and privacy at that time was not that important, and the big Facebook, Google, Amazon, and others were very small activities. And it's very good. I'm very happy to see that now privacy has become top priority for everybody, for every companies, to telecom, to bank, to retail type of industry. This is really good because we have seen really the changes. And this is why Veon wants to also try to take the lead on privacy. So of course we comply with GDPR. We have developed a GDPR readiness plan, established a lot of work stream, and of course have accomplished what we have to do by May 25. You know, this is the date in Europe where everybody has to comply with GDPR. But what I wanted to share with you is that, as you may know, compliance is, I don't know if this is the most appropriate word for GDPR, because there is no specific guidelines, there is no rules. You don't know. In fact, there is not a European Commission document that says if you do A, B, and C, you will comply. It's not a tick in the box exercise, which is what is interesting with GDPR. So some data protection authorities in the world, in the UK, in Spain, have drafted their own guidance to their own companies. Some haven't, which is fine as well. So this is really about a new concept that I like with GDPR. When you think about compliance, this is about accountability. And I really think that this is a new concept. We had discussion with colleagues about accountability. I remember in 2010, when Commissioner Reding was leading the GDPR, so it took 8 years before the implementation. I was at Microsoft at that time. I was leading data protection for Europe and Middle East and Africa. And we discussed with the Commissioner Reding staff about accountability. And most of them were not aware about this concept because this is, I would say, from a US Anglo-Saxon environment. This basically means that you are accountable. It means that it's more of a risk-based approach. If you as a company do the right thing, you shall not be punished. It's really about self-certification. This is totally new in Europe, at least for a French guy. I'm French, obviously. At least for a French guy, this is new. You don't translate accountability. Is it liability? We don't really translate. Same in Spanish, same in Russian. I mean, it's a word that is very US and Anglo-Saxon, but works today. So that's interesting to see that at Veon, we took an accountability approach. So we have established our own work stream, and we work with the business units, and we really wanted to make sure that we comply, if word compliance can apply, within GDPR. So we appointed a data protection officer, and this person will be in charge with relation with the Dutch Data Protection Authority, so our supervisory authority. And I just wanted to finish, because I know that the idea is to be short. I just want to, no pressure, I just wanted to finish because I have, as you can imagine, many things to say about privacy. But as a company, what is key around this is, of course, privacy is about trust. We all know that. But privacy is about a demonstration, a proof of trust. So if a company is not in a position to explain to its customers or users that it's doing the right things to basically comply with the data protection environment, this is totally useless. So this is why we adopted privacy by design rules. We really adopted the dashboard and many things. Many companies will say the same, so that's very important that they continue to say the same and to offer the new subject rights to their customers. This is a long journey. So May 25 is just a second or first step because it's not new, the privacy environment. And I'm sure that we will be able to discuss this for the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. And now we have Jörn Abgut from Geneva School of Diplomacy. We have some slides.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. I mean, since he'll be talking about blockchain, he prepared some slides for us mere mortals in the audience. So, yes, please.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to put too many slides. I just want to say first, well, sorry. Thank you. First thing is, don't put any personal identifiable information directly on the blockchain in plain text, because then it doesn't work together. That's clear. But there are lots of possibilities. You can use blockchain in a very GDPR compliant way. You can use encryption, hash values, hash functions, zero knowledge proofs, homomorphic encryption, and there are even specialized blockchains like Zcash, Hyperledger, or blockchains using chameleon hash functions. I won't go into detail what that means, otherwise I'd be talking the rest of the session. But these technologies provide a high level of privacy, and the difference between existing technology and these technologies is that they ensure privacy by design, meaning even an administrator cannot circumvent it. If you have a conventional database, an administrator can always set privileges in a way that administrators can access any kind of data, and there is a higher chance of abuse, higher risk of abuse. With these technologies, this problem does not exist. You ensure it for everybody. It's not just for the outside, but for everybody. But of course, there are drawbacks. The Article 29 Working Party has discussed them and has applied a very strict stand on those technologies. I think it's a much too strict stand, because you should take the recital 26 approach evenly for all technologies. And it means that if you cannot identify a person with all the means reasonably likely to be used, then it isn't personal identifiable information. And you should apply the same approach there as well. And I think there is some possibility to use privacy-enabling technology, even in the domain of public blockchains, which will ensure privacy even above current standards in conventional technology. Thank you.
That was quick. Thank you, Jörn. Last but not least, we have Susanne Tempelhoff, founder of BitNation, and we're hoping to hear from you the transparency and accountability and the civil society perspective from also a rights-based approach.
Yes, hello. Okay, so I have several things I would like to address that has been discussed today. I will start with just mentioning what you said briefly, which is that I completely agree with you that nothing personal should ever be put on a blockchain apart from hashes, and a couple of other things that I will come to later. But I would like to discuss a much deeper issue that I think is at the core of everything we're discussing here. So I am very attached to something that I like to call the battle between positive rights versus negative rights. Right? If you look at something like the US Constitution, for instance, and please mark my words, I'm not a US citizen, and I'm not even alt-right, even though I come across as one from time to time. But I do think the US Constitution has something really interesting to offer, in the sense that every constitutional article just says this is a negative right. This says the government is not allowed to do this. The government is not allowed to do that, right? And if we look at everything we have discussed today, and in particular GDPR, we're talking about positive rights, saying the government must do this, or the government must do that. And I'm actually hugely opposed to that. And I personally feel offended by it. I feel offended by every single person in this entire room for trying to tell me how to live my life. You have no right to do so. Even if you're telling me that you need to protect my data privacy, which I do just fine myself, thank you very much, you have no single right to tell me what to do with my life. And I don't think I speak only for myself. I think I speak for a large number of my generation, whether right wing or left wing or in the middle. It's just offensive that a bunch of bureaucrats in this office are trying to tell us what to do. So I'm all for negative rights, and I think you should all swallow your pride and forget everything what so-called positive rights is, because it's not positive in anyone else's mind than people who's getting paid by Brussels or by Frankfurt or by any national government or anything else. Forget it. So that was my main point, really. Thank you.
So the discussion is heating up. So again, from a rights-based perspective, it's also, I mean, you're more than welcome to share your comments and questions, but before Mr. O'Donoghue leaves, I mean, the GDPR aims, GDPR has a very ambitious aim, putting the user back into the equation, in the center, empowered, in charge of their own data. So what are actually the additional steps to be taken to actually achieve a user or human-centric data protection?
Thank you. Well, as a Brussels bureaucrat, the first thing I would say was that whereas we would love if we were in a legal framework in which we could have legislation that asserted the rights of people, which is the positive. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that. The rights of people, and then created the environment in which people could assert that right. That would mean that they would have to spend their time litigating. But also because of the way in which, for example, the technology, the sector that we're dealing with is working, is that it appears to me that there will always be a technical workaround to any set of rules that we create. So the GDPR has actually been criticized, rather not in the way that you've criticized it, as being a set of negative prescriptions. Is because it is clearly forbidding people from doing things with data.
No, actually, positive rights.
No, that's not correct. It is while it frames itself as something which is seeking to assert the rights of individuals and to create an environment for them, it is nevertheless basically articulated on a set of things that data processors and data controllers may not do. Well, I'm not talking from a constitutional perspective, I'm actually talking from a practical implementation of law perspective. But, okay, well, no, it's fine. I mean, I'd love to hear you explain your position. I don't quite understand everything that you have said. I'll try to make myself clear, and then I'd love to hear you. But on terms of your question, Jenny, is that is just the legal framework. What we really need to do now is to ensure that the technologies that we were working on, which can, unfortunately, we see in examples, work against the individual and work for the machinery, the system, the commercial interest that has put them in the market, that nevertheless, with the set of technologies, privacy-enhancing technologies, we want to be in a position where, through our Next Generation Internet Initiative, increasingly we allow the user to control their internet environment to a much greater extent. So there will be a greater element of choice, rather than the internet environment defining them. So the most recent example of a disconnect that we're seeing is that as individuals, all of us are now receiving a huge amount of email traffic, in some cases completely pointless, from operators who are saying, on the basis of what our obligations now are with regard to the GDPR, please click on something, please unclick on something, please inform us of your choices or whatever. When in fact, for the first thing, there was no need, there was no break in continuity, but what there was a greater obligation now on those who held any of your data to ensure that you were aware of it. And what we are clear of is that with the GDPR, an awful lot of users are not aware of how their data is held, what data is held, and how it is processed. And that is where the privacy-enhancing technologies have to come in, sitting on top of the GDPR, where we create an internet that actually allows people to take the choices. Because as we know from practice with regard to a lot of the social media, for example, a significant number of users are not concerned about the use of their data. They are prepared to trade their data for services or for other things. And it is just a question of ensuring that they can do so in a dynamic way and with greater transparency. And that's really where we need to go now in the work that we're doing on data enhancing privacy technologies.
Okay, Jonathan Cave from various places, mainly UK. The thing about the burden imposed on people by these GDPR emails, leaving aside the question of whether those emails themselves are not an illegal infringement of privacy, which in many cases, of course, they are, is that it works like the cookie law. And I'm concerned that the lessons of that cookie law have not been learnt, which is that, as with demonstrations of right to live in a place or work in a place or something like that, the process creates a requirement for making people aware and documenting that you have made them aware. It doesn't ask whether that's proportionate, whether people can understand the things to which they are being asked to give consent. The thing about privacy, it's not about the identification of individuals, because privacy is data protection. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the United States. I'm a US citizen as well as a European citizen. In the US, with these positive rights, rather negative rights against the state, you do actually have privacy protection in the 4th and 14th Amendments. There's nothing analogous over here. It's about data protection. I am not my data. I resent being reduced to my data and being asked to spend a large chunk of my life curating my data so that people who are in control of those data and have a fiduciary duty to understand them will be able to lay off liability onto me. Consent may not be an adequate basis for regulation in a world of such complexity and such speed. And that being the case, I'm not sure that GDPR doesn't represent a precautionary approach of a system trying to retain its traction within a domain where it doesn't really, may not be the most effective insurer of a well-regulated system, where the use of these data actually doesn't work against people's interests. So I'm concerned that it's following the same route that's been done before, which is inform people, treat them as rational beings, despite the fact that we know that they aren't, and do so by reducing privacy, which is a fundamental philosophical concept, to something which is manageable within black-letter law. So I understand why it's happened that way. I welcome your notion that, like Personal Data Protection Directive, it's going to be reinterpreted and reinvented, and we'll pursue this natural experiment. But I would be careful about claiming too much for it. And I know that civil law processes tend to do that.
So I was going to make a point of that. Rely on encryption, and encryption enables everyone to control their own data, and being able, and yet within the European Union, there's quite a lot of fear about encrypted technology. Indeed, legislation to prevent encrypted technologies, the possibility of encrypted technologies within the European Union. Surely, so there has been discussion, I think, between France and Germany about banning encryption. Maybe I'm wrong.
In the member states, several of the more security conscious or sécuritaire, as we would say in French, member states.
Suzanne. So the point I'm making is that there is a possibility of returning to a situation where privacy was a given. You know, if you sent a letter to someone in the 1990s, if somebody opened that letter, they had immediately committed a crime. But now privacy is not. We've changed, we've shifted. So privacy is now in the gift of the state. We may have it, perhaps, but it's not a guarantee. And encryption provides the possibility for everyone to reclaim privacy over their data, to own their data, and to have, yes, to be sovereign over their data. And yet, on the one hand, we're trying to use a regulatory framework like GDPR to somehow control or limit or to somehow give privacy back to people rather than where it's already to some degree been taken. But on the other hand, isn't the future about people reclaiming their privacy by allowing everyone to encrypt their data and to not, and therefore to be able to give it, as you said, many people want to give it to other people, but to have control over that themselves?
Can I answer the question that was, can I put the question that was put to me?
Around the globe is the freedom of expression. If you don't subscribe to privacy, you don't...
sorry.
You don't
The mic is not open. If you could just wait for a moment, and could you please introduce yourself?
So my name is James Fennell, and I'm a former UK government employee, but I'm also working with BitNation right now.
Also my husband.
Okay, thank you. The question that was put to me and the previous comment as well, which I think was very relevant, but is that we can be very clear as the European Commission that we have stated very clearly that we want to allow end-to-end encryption controlled by the user. And there have been discussions and that's why I asked you to be precise as to when you said within the European Union. Several member states have on several occasions suggested that there must be automatic backdoors. Well, that's my own experience, having had discussions with several member states that I'm talking about. So, and the Commission has flatly refused that for the very thing that I was saying earlier on about trust and security. If people believe that what you have said about privacy being in the gift, we don't believe that privacy should be or is in the gift of governments. It should be a right in Europe under our charter. In our Charter on Fundamental Rights, it is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right which has been backed up by the European Court of Justice. Some of the cases that people are very familiar with now on Facebook, etc., have been taken not in relation to an article of a law, but actually on the basis of the provisions of that Charter on Fundamental Rights. So it's dynamic effect. Well, that's an interesting statement. What I will admit to is that there has been some There have been over literal interpretations, and in fact in some cases inaccurate interpretations, which have, if anything, created greater ill will to by the average user to what is legislation which was supposed to be to support them. But what we would, of course, ideally like to have is a situation in which the technology allows the individual to take their choices, but where I cannot agree with you is that at the end of the day, because it's a slippery slope, we need to accept that the individual is not a rational and cautious human being. In other words, individuals have to take responsibility. They have to curate their data. We should, well, they are capable, that's just it. But what at the moment we're making it more difficult for them because of the volume and the complexity of this repeated, every single website you've ever given a piece of data to is now coming back to you to ask you, whereas we should have a system, we should have systems which allow you at point of access to have the same controls, perhaps AI-based, which will allow you to curate, as you call it, all of your interfaces and maybe to break them down into different sections so that you do not have to do it on a piecemeal, bit-by-bit basis.
But that's the right of exploitation. The right of exploitation for automated processing
Then with this discussion that we just made, we come to a point that if there is this collecting of data from different social media and from different people who actually collect our data in order for us to be more responsible for our data, then shouldn't be controlled what they are asking us? Because if you use one of these social media, he asks the permission to collect your data. Then if you don't give this access, then you don't get this, let's say, this option of using this. Then where is the state controlling this data? Or this it's like an obligatory information that he wants to take for me to use Facebook, let's say. Then why don't we give the people the right to be more aware of their data and the way they use their data, and then control the others who are collecting this data in a better way?
If I may, sorry, yeah, you're very correct. I mean, if I may, this is effectively one of the approach, and I hear this is a passionate debate. I've never seen that. This is nice, interesting, I would say, but this is not new. The privacy paradox is something we discussed for ages. On the one hand, effectively, you can imagine that if people accept to put all those data online, this is because they want it. This is the moment they are very happy with this, and this is something that is growing. So, but I agree with you. This is about information, education, and this is very important, and I don't see any type of control. It's very important to explain to any citizen what is good and what is in the interest online, because a teenager doesn't want to know, has no idea about the right to be forgotten and that stuff, and the consequences are very important. So I have kids, and I say to my kids, well, don't do that, but not everybody can do that to his own kids and even to the family. So I don't see, I mean, that's very interesting, but I'm a strong supporter of this action. We can spend hours discussing on GDPR, and we just have 10 minutes left. So, but really, I think this is a very good step for protecting individuals, because there is this is not rocket science. Maybe there is no optimal solution, but this is really a very important one. And as you know very well, with the new artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, this may be no longer adapted in maybe today already, but that's fine. We will adapt. Regulation as always lagging behind the new technologies, but that's fine. We also need to educate. So just want to, education and information is key, and people are smart enough to understand this.
I think Susan asked a very important question. Whom did we really empower with GDPR? Did we empower the user? Did we empower governments, DPAs, data protection authorities? Did we really empower maybe the big data processing companies? One thing, when you look at GDPR, mostly government is excluded. They can make laws, and they can process even more than they used to process. And even what is an important example point, peer-to-peer technology is disfavored. You have an image of a centralized architecture, and peer-to-peer technology runs into trouble, and we are discussing this heavily right now. And when you take a look, I have prepared a short example. For example, I've got an image of that I put on some platform.
Sophia.
Yeah, Sophia. Well, she has no privacy rights because she's not human. But well, of course, I do have. When this image is then transferred to other platforms, it means I lose control. Of course, I can ask people to follow it, and what GDPR basically says, well, Everybody has a justification, everybody needs to keep track, they need to keep track that it's my image, etc. And what this does basically is that the GDPR is producing even more personalized data in order to protect my personalized data.
Might I add something to that?
If I can just add, I'm finished in a bit and then, thank you. When I put the permission on the blockchain, I can put it in a way that cannot be followed and cannot be identified with myself, just with the image. And then I can link the image to the permission, and when I revoke the permission, all providers have always to check if they still got the permission to keep the data, keep the image, and then they will need to delete the image to comply with the regulation. So there's no need to keep that trace, but you can put it on a decentralized system and prevent the collection of even more data in order to be compliant with GDPR.
And then the great question, of course, is who is they? Who will gonna check whose data it is, whose IP it is, intellectual property, right? Or whose data it is. That means a third party can access all of your information, all of your communication, all of your messages, all your private messages, all your government messages, all of it, right? So here you go. It's not about tracing terrorism. It's not about tracing IP. It's about the ability from a few selected individuals, like individuals in this room, to access everyone's personal data at all time for no peculiar reason.
Hi to everybody. My name is Miguel Pérez. I came from the Spanish Internet Users Association, and I want to share with you some experiences that we have working now related with privacy, and some experiences that we have worked in the past related with privacy. In the last 3 years, we developed some tools in order to have some information about who take your data in the network, or how is the value that you generate with your data. We developed some plugins, for example, to know the money that you generate for Facebook, for example. You put this plugin in your browser and you get the money that you generate each time that you use your Facebook. Then you have the idea of what is the value of your time that you spend in this social network. But now we are working, generate tools are really okay, that helps, but it seems that nobody are interested in their privacy. Then we detect that there are some things that we can change. For example, we don't believe that the term of use, every time you have a long term of use in your services, and nobody reads, and everyone say, okay, I agree with this term of use, then we think that it will be interesting to change this term of use by labels, by transparency labels, in order to have something very simple, like food labels, or in order to have the information, not the information that the company wants to give us, but the company that are really important for us. Then we need to define these labels and to try to convince the other part, the companies, in order to adopt this label. Then to want to begin the discussion about either it's possible to generate transparency labels or right labels with a very simple messages for end users. We think that it will be possible. Then we want to discuss. Another question is to have personal data avatars. Now you need to peregrinate in every application to say, okay, I want that information, I want to share that or not. Then it will be very easy if I say what are my preferences only once, and the companies check what are your preferences. Then it will be more rational for end users. And I think that it will be possible then. It's just to to share with you these two projects. And also, if you are interested in our tools, you can check in testyourprivacy.org. It's a website where you can find these tools that we have developed in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before the session, we were having this discussion about the prior information to be given to the end user, and we talked about this consent mania, consent versus legitimate interest. I'm sure I'm not the only one who received tons of emails asking for my explicit consent. I mean, so it's, would you?
Isn't that a great thing? Because you can eliminate all those photos that
Yeah.
selected you. You had no idea that you were on their list.
Yeah, exactly. That was interesting, but maybe Annie and Jean?
No, I just have a question to you. So what is the value of the data for an average citizen? This is very interesting because I'm not really aware, I don't really know, in fact, because we say so many figures. So what is your cost if you spend like half of your day on Facebook and other social media?
You can get this information directly.
Yes, and I will visit your website, but can you share something with us?
But what we do is just we check what are the value that the advertisers add for your profile in for the platform, and then I check how many advertisers you receive, how many do you click, and then we calculate the revenue for.
Okay, so it differs. In France, there is a debate at this moment about this precisely, about the value of your data, your data. Everybody says many things about that, this is oil of news, okay. But what is interesting is that in France, so basically the debate is, okay, on the one hand, if you want to have an access to something, and because you are the owner of your own data, you can have a choice. Choice one is you accept to have this access, but this has a cost, then this company should send you some money back. Option two, you don't want to have this access, so you don't want to have any advertising, etc., then you don't have access to this service. This is really an interesting debate that we have today in France about basically I'm fine to receive some money back, and thanks to that, for example, if I use Waze, this geolocalization application, thanks to Waze, I can drive all over the place, and I have a lot of advice, but that's fine, but this is for free. Nothing is for free, as we know. So it means that today, if you want to change this paradigm, you can give, Waze can give you some money, because this is your data that they use, and you have access to the service. And on the other hand, option two is that you don't want to use Waze, or you don't want Waze to use your data, then you don't have an access to Waze. This is the debate today in France. Yeah.
Like people who get paid to write blog posts. So there's already technology succeeded by.
Just open the phone because the people online
Or that, yeah.
So there are already technologies which are, it's, if you like, the Internet of Value is the next technological step, but there are already technologies and very successful businesses which are paying people for their data to create content on the Internet. So in many ways, I think the next technological leap is going to be that people will automatically be paid for providing data, and that will create, hopefully, vast amounts of new value, new economic growth, globally.
No, if you look at something. But James can do that.
Thank you. So if we go back to this consent mania, if we can call that, well, of course, consent has to be voluntary. And then in the other room when we were discussing these GDPR issues, and one of the issues was consent is for example, if a company is offering you a service in exchange of your consent, how voluntary can it be considered? And well, as for and we were discussing about informed consent and how much the users are really informed when they are giving consent. I guess one of the roles of the DPAs as well is while assessing if the consent was duly obtained from people is to see whether people really understand what they are saying yes to. However, that is of course not easy because different people have different different understandings of things, and at least like what we would encourage would be to draft these consent clauses with as easier as it could be, or in a simple language. But also we should not forget, and the companies I think forgot about that consent is not really the only basis for collecting and using data. So there could be other legal basis for that as well. So we should definitely not be overwhelming our users with this.
Thank you. Actually, if you look at Steemit, it does not sell user data. Steemit sells attention, which is a completely different issue. What Steemit rewards users for are the number of views, which they issue with their own tokens. I think it's a very clever reward program, but it can most closely be associated with something like flight miles, for instance. That is the closest non-crypto comparison you can have for something like Steemit. And it does not gather or sell anyone's personal data whatsoever.
Well, of course, personal information is valuable, but I'm not sure if we are already ready to go that way. When you look at Washington Post now, they have a special EU subscription without any advertisement, which is much more expensive than the usual subscription model. And we are talking about choice, but EU citizens don't have a choice anymore to be exploited and receive cheap content. So are we ready to accept that, or are we not?
Since, quite surprisingly, in the past decade, Europe has drunk the Kool-Aid of competitive markets and their particular notion of consent, you would have to say no, because nobody ever asked us. At least they never asked us in those terms. On the question of consent, I think it's important to be clear about this. You're right, many of these contracts are contracts of adhesion. You don't have a fair choice, and intermediates between clicking yes and clicking no are not negotiable. In responsible research and innovation, we talk about the negotiability of these ethical costs, and it's absent from this, of course, because it's a regulation. It's a cost to become informed. If you have, for example, there was a trichloroethylene spill into the groundwater in Los Angeles, and they went and at great pains notified the poor people in those areas that their water was poisoned. And there was nothing they could individually do about it. But consent is predicated on informing individuals, not groups. What they could do was to get angry politically and do something about it, but they couldn't afford bottled water. All it did was to take a risk they couldn't affect and shove it right in their face. Unambiguously made them worse off. And that fear does have a cost. Also, I was very struck by this notion that we shouldn't be thinking of people as irrational or as stupid, under conditions in which manifestly they are. The me who releases information at one point in my life is not the me who may wish to be forgotten at another point or remembered at another point. Because my decisions are not time consistent, you can't hold me today when I am observed accountable in any normative sense for the actions of my future self. Moreover, it may be an event that causes me to change my mind about whether my data should be released. If I'm not aware of the event, I can't choose that. So you can't infer what my decisions would have been in conditions that are not feasible to replicate. Another point is that it's not my personal data, as your picture shows. It's many people's personal data, and their consents may be difficult to obtain and sustain across all the different uses, thus sort of magnifying the cost, because most of what's observed about us is not observed about us as private individuals, but rather as people acting in society. Then finally, the issue of value, the value which I'm controlling by my consent. My data have one use: to target me as part of a discussion to give me things I might like better. But of course, you don't have to identify me by this. That's just the way GDPR chose tagline it, there is such a thing as differential privacy. You can get part of the value by partially identifying me. And we quite understand this in general. And the two extremes are you observe me and target me and give me an ad, or you collect my data, put it into a database, and use analytics to understand how people like me behave. In both cases, you release value from it. In one case, the value is entirely released from my pocket. In the other case, the value is more of a social value. If we give people too much consent, for example, around health situations, then some people will consent, other people will not. The data sets will change. They may change in a way that's correlated with the thing that we care about. That selection bias undercuts the use of analytics to deal with these data. So if I only get privacy insensitive people volunteering to tell me about the side effects of drugs that they take, for example, if that privacy insensitivity is correlated with the thing that makes them sensitive or not, our decisions as to how to treat people with medical conditions and so on, those decisions are undercut. These are not simple things to be dealt with either at the level of society as a whole or the lone individual. And so I think there are real dangers in trying to stick to one or another end of that continuum.
Okay, so we have been debating for a long time, and I know the session is drawing to an end. So if I can just say something that really matters to me, as an entrepreneur, as a European citizen, and as a software developer, is that keep your hands off my code. And don't pressure the app stores. Don't pressure the Google Play Store. Don't pressure the iOS Store. Don't make our lives impossible. We're just trying to make life livable and provide better software for everyone around us. We are not asking you for money. We don't want your money. We just want the freedom to create software that people find usable. And we don't want anyone to get in our way while doing so. We want our encryption alone. We want our crypto.
And, oh, Jean, please.
I mean, if no one, yeah. Thanks. I just wanted to say two additional things. One is based on what you said, like this very much, and the other one is what Susan said. But generally speaking, I mean, of course, that's important to encrypt and to protect the maximum, but I'm always very surprised with the fact that we put far more pressure and passion on this online world versus the offline world. Because the term and condition, when you buy your washing machine or whatsoever, no one reads. I mean, maybe someone is reading in this room the term of conditions, the 20 pages, but no one is reading that. Same for the whole offline world. So that's maybe good, that's maybe not good. I have no idea, but this exists. And this, you know, basically, this is your, as a consumer, this goes with a lot of rights or issues. When you buy a car, I'm not sure that you read everything. This is exactly the same. So that's good that we overprotect ourselves because of this capillarity effect of the internet. That's very good. But we also shall always remind that if we are doing that on the online world, we also bear in mind that for the offline world, this is the same. When you go into a supermarket, what you maybe don't want to buy is just on the forefront because guys pay for this, which makes sense, and this is advertising. Online, digital advertising goes with a lot of rules and security, which is maybe good as well, but it's just never forget the offline world, the world where we live every day, where terms and conditions are not explicit enough. On the point that you mentioned about the fact that this is not about that people are intelligent or not. Yes, of course, let's say that by design or by default, people are smart. Okay. But the problem of those guys, of us, no, but intelligent. I mean, we can discuss about semantic, but let's say that people have a strong appetite to do what is good for them. The problem is that what people want is basically to be informed. So we come back to what we say. This is for me about education and information. Because when you go on a certain web page, what you just need to understand is the consequences of that. So you want to buy a ticket online. I mean, no one maybe will read the privacy settings and the privacy statements. They just want to buy their ticket. So it's important that they have clear terminology that explains that if they buy their ticket, One, they will have some advertising from a lot of air companies. Two, they will not be able to do that, etc. And this has to be done in a very simple and explicit way. So we're coming back to the user control, which is not new. This is user control is something that we all mentioned for many years. But this is about, maybe we can imagine privacy dashboard or explicit notice. This is what, to some extent, is with GDPR, maybe with other directives. But again, this is about information and understand the consequence of what you are doing online. This is, for me, the most important. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid that this will be not a very user-friendly future. We will have more and more checkboxes, and it's not enough to check one 50-page document, because that's not valid anymore. You have to give explicit consent to every single thing, and you will be checking dozens of checkboxes in the future, and we will all feel very empowered by that. So what is the solution to this? Its solution is something like a do not track system, meaning that you have your privacy preferences, but not in the way do not track does it. It's not that you say, I don't want to be tracked, but you will state what you are allowing people to do. And then this configuration can be sent as a default setting, and they don't have to manually ask you, but you give consent because you say, I'm okay with this and this and this, and I'm not okay with the rest.
If I may, sorry to interrupt. If I may, yes, but I think this already exists. Microsoft, for example, already have these privacy settings and privacy dashboard. But again, it's not because this is by default that you want this. So as a user, as a citizen, I maybe would like to know what has been parametered by default, because I would like to change them. And I mean, there is not a single response, but it's not something that everybody wants.
Default is optimal privacy. This is the law.
Same. I mean, what is optimal privacy? For some, this will be like, I don't care, I just want to do this. For others, this is a privacy paradox. This is not easy. I mean, who can decide what is the best for the citizen? This is why you have these rules today.
Okay, so I've been in the crypto world for quite some time, and I do think that the next great battle within crypto over the next decade to come will be between the extreme privacy camp and the extreme transparency camp, which you might not think are opposed, but which are opposed to, and I know which side I stand on. So actually, when people speak about radical privacy, it's easy to say, there is no such thing as radical privacy, because, okay, so let's say, for instance, let's take a stupid example. Let's say you want to buy a burner phone in a store. So obviously you can't drive there with your car because your car have like the GDPR system. You can't be shown on the street because it might have cameras. You need to mask yourself. Obviously you can't use a card. You can only use cash, but where do you get the cash from on the other hand? And then where do you use the phone? You can't use it close to any other devices because the devices connect to each other. So if you're followed by intelligence, they will make the connection. So just to buy like a burner phone, if you actually care about radical privacy, you have to go to quite some extreme radical ends. So many people come from the perspective saying, well, there is no such thing as radical privacy. And that might be true. But there is also no such thing as radical transparency on the other side. But there is such thing as plausible privacy. There is such thing as controlling your own data. There is such thing as not being monitored every single day, every single awakened hour, by every single communication means. There is such thing as actually having a private life and a public life that are separate. And I think, and the government cannot and should not get involved in that, because that will guarantee that we will never have it. That will guarantee that we are thrown straight back into Orwellian 1984 sort of setting. The only people who can guarantee that we have it are individuals themselves through reclaiming their own privacy and their own security.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Right. I think that's a common misunderstanding that transparency and privacy would fight each other. I really don't think that's the case. And it's really about transparency of administration and governance that a lot of people who feel strongly about having good privacy. So that's a usual confusion. People don't have to be transparent about their own life. So don't think there's a contradiction there. It doesn't need to be.
Okay, so please define governance. What is governance? Is governance a nation-state governance? Is governance the United Nations? Is governance the European Union? Is governance a company? Is governance an NGO? Is governance a family? Is governance a relationship? Is governance a startup? So anything that is more than one unit becomes a governance. So as soon that is more than one unit of person, then becomes a government and should be transparent. So for instance, if you are a unit of three, let's say a polyamorous unit, that becomes a governance situation which should be transparent to the world, even if you might live in a place like Iran where it's punishable by death.
How you think that what you are explaining right now can be managed? Because you are saying something that maybe you think you are explaining, but you are not explaining. We are trying to manage as best as in the better way possible, the way whoever controls this data. That's what we are trying to do, no? By regulation. I don't understand your point.
I think it's like the main objective of this EuroDiG meeting is
That's what I'm saying.
creating a so regulation is not the only solution, as we say, but I'm afraid
Yes,
we're...
I agree with that, but how she's
Yeah.
proposing it, because...
No, and I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'll be happy to continue the discussion during the lunch break. We started 8 minutes late. We are going to end 8 minutes late. I would like to, before the final remarks, I'd like to ask, because especially when I'm discussing this with younger people, I'm observing that they don't share. Almost all of the discussions we're having right now is based on our analog notion of privacy. And since we have some youth fellows here, I don't know how you perceive privacy, because I think we don't define privacy the same way, we don't experience privacy the same way, so how do you, any youth fellows who would like to contribute on that? No? Out of the blue? Elif?
It's Elif Sard. So to me, I research on privacy, so I do care about privacy, but I could be an exception among my friends, because I see ridiculous stuff where they do not care about it at all, because I think somehow it's thought to them. But there are also friends of mine who do care about privacy. So my age, I think it's we're half-half, but if you go to younger ages, Generation Z, is it? I think they're at the age. Thank you.
That's fine. I just wanted to share my opinion. As I'm also part of the young generation, or how we call it.
Oh, you have to be proud. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I'm proud. I'm proud. And the thing is that, it's my decision what I share with the world, and I can set it up with any service I use. So if I agree to terms and conditions and the things they use, I don't really see a point in, being concerned of data I share. I'm aware of what I share, and I'm okay with that. So, I don't really see a reason why I should pay too much attention to data protection.
So I'd like to have some final remarks. Yes.
Just very quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt you in your final remarks. just to say, no, that's incorrect. You need to own and control your own data. It's not just that you choose whatever you know, Facebook say you can share with whatever one. You actually need to fucking own it on your own, whatever, IPFS or server or computer. Do not ever, ever trust a third-party provider, ever. Sorry about that.
Well, I think the privacy is about self-determination. So if you say, I want to cry this out to the world, I want to publish, I want to say, I've been there, please, everybody should know it, that's fine. That's not against privacy. It's your privacy right to decide that you want this to be public. And it's your privacy right that you reverse your mind, that you say afterwards. So it's perfect. There's no contradiction here. I don't see it.
Sure. I think privacy, everybody has his own views on privacy, which is nice, interesting. So, but for me, privacy is about trust. Maybe not transparency, I would agree with you. We can discuss again for hours about those notions, but this is really about trust. Why? Because this is about controlling over your data as someone that owns his personal data. But again, we come back to the privacy paradox, where the young generation, even if we are not that old, but my teenagers are doing the same. I know that you are no longer teenagers, but they are still doing the same. But they now start to be educated again. This is about education. So the privacy paradox, effectively, no one maybe cares about having his data used by cares. So we need to care about those that really care and educate those that don't know the impact, the consequences of that. So privacy, again, is about trust, because if we break this trust, we go to the scandals that we've heard over the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure that dozens and dozens will occur in the future. So this is the role of us as a company to be accountable. So basically meaning that we need to behave, of course, very well. We need, of course, to follow the law, but we need to do more if we can. We can offer a privacy dashboard, but I really encourage companies to do more, and not only following the rules. Everybody has to follow the rules, this goes without saying, but it would be good if companies show the example and on the way they deal with data.
Yeah, I think I would add to that the role of the DPAs is also raising awareness of the public, and one of the top priorities of the Georgian DPA, especially taking into consideration that we've been here we've been operating only for 5 years now, is also that. And when we're talking about the things like people not realizing the decisions that they're making and not being able to make informed decisions, I think the role of data protection authorities is definitely one of the biggest roles, is to educate the public in order for them then to take decisions whether to share and not care about privacy or to protect it more. So I guess.
The big problem at the moment is the way that the internet has evolved is that our data is held by too few institutions, too few companies, too few governments. So what we've had is a process of all our data being consolidated in very few sources, and for that reason it is not private. It can be compromised, and often it is compromised. We have a new wave of technology which makes it possible for us to hold our data in a decentralized way, which means that each of us can control that data and have control over who gets access to it. We're not dependent upon the regulations that are placed upon these very few institutions which hold so much data, so much control over the information which runs our world. For me, the hope is that that technology will take hold and will transform the whole context in which this discussion is taking place, so that data is in the control of individuals and in individuals' gift through encryption to decide whether or not they give it to institutions or or not in the future. And for me, I think right now we're having to over-regulate because we have very few institutions holding all this data. In the future, that will not be necessary because each of us will have control over our data.
Thank you very much. That was a very good wrapping up point. Now we have to turn to Aida Mahmudovic, our reporter. He's going to share the bullet points she took notes of, that you're free to object at any time.
That's correct. So I'm here in front of Geneva Internet Platform, a Digital Watch Observatory. What we're going to do is publish full summary reports of all sessions, including this one, which you can find at dig.watch, as well as the EuroDiG wiki page. But now I will share with you 5 messages that I kind of gathered from all this fantastic discussion. And what we're trying to do is gather rough consensus in the room. So bear with me. First, privacy should be the center issue in everything we do, and its central parts should be privacy by design and security by design.
Sorry, but privacy is important, but it's not the most important thing in the world.
Yes, it is.
Come on, we're here discussing.
Privacy and security is the most important, and it's your inseparable.
I will make sure to note if someone says no.
Privacy is the most important thing.
This was the statement, and I will just make sure to, if, like, how many hands is for no, I will make sure to note it.
Can I just point out that pursuant to what you say, health is the most important thing in the world when you're ill.
No.
Financial security is the most important thing in the world when you're poor.
We see your
Privacy is important in a specific time and circumstance only.
It's the most important period.
privacy is an important topic.
Privacy and security and you're inseparable.
It's the way to end.
I think we should move on.
Okay. Second, privacy is about a demonstration and the proof of trust, and entities collecting users' data need to be proactive in ensuring transparency and accountability.
Wrong.
Please note the objections.
Yes. Okay, so first of all, entities should...
So I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't, I apologize, Jaren, maybe I wasn't clear. This is not about prolonging discussion, but just like you saying, yeah, exactly. You can put fingers as well. Well, these fingers at least. 3, users are willing to share their data for a service. Therefore, education and information is key for users to understand what is at stake and to take responsibility.
Well, maybe some users are willing to.
Okay. Thank you. I'm noting that. 2 more to go. Information that companies ask users in order to access a service need to be controlled.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, information that companies ask users in order to access the service, a service, need to be controlled.
Not by government, by the free market.
No, what do you mean by control?
Because you were talking before, like what questions they were asking and what type of information they're asking users for. Because sometimes some make no sense.
Not by anyone, by users, by the market.
Yeah, please.
What you can say that it's important that companies give user control or develop user control type of approach.
Yeah, user control would be a better term.
Perhaps not. I mean, I like it the way it's phrased now, in the same way that you can say internet governance or well-regulated system without assuming either government or regulation. Because it is not purely laissez-faire, that if there are legitimate interests, they should have a voice in control. So I think it shouldn't be made longer, it just gets more complicated.
Right. And 5, right to encrypt. We heard a lot about encryption. Right to encrypt should be everyone's right.
Something that we have to encrypt all our data.
It should be a negative right, meaning like the First Amendment. It's a right the government cannot infringe upon.
Can't prevent.
Yeah, exactly. It should be like the right of speech, the right of encryption. It's not something the government should provide, it's something the government simply can't infringe on.
Okay, may I suggest a right to encrypt should be available to everyone?
No, that's a positive right. I'm talking about negative rights. It's something that the government should never be allowed to prevent.
Okay.
You want to add something else?
Yeah.
You want something like a First Amendment right? The government
Yes.
Can we go further and say government should not have the right to break encryption?
No, No, government shouldn't have the right to comment on
still
encryption,
exists.
to prevent encryption, to even look at encryption.
But why don't we say,
Encryption
you
is
had
as
a good,
fundamental as the right to speech, as the right to leave.
I think you had a good formula. Maybe we can use this one. But maybe we can say the right effectively to encryption. I disagree, but that's fine. Could be offered together with privacy enhanced technologies, the so-called PETs.
Could be offered with?
Could be offered together with privacy enhancing technologies to users.
Absolutely not. So this is not something that the government can or should offer. It's something that the government should not be able to even comment on or be involved in.
I think she already has noted.
Yes.
Okay, thank you
I was
very
trying.
much. This has been